artificial intelligence is going to make the human race obsolete. And a lot of people don't really want to think about AI, artificial intelligence, kind of an intimidating subject. But you know, the thing about AI is even if you don't want to think about it, it's thinking about you. Or is it? Well, that'll be the kind of question we'll discuss today on this episode of Independent Conversations. Greetings, everybody who's joined us. I'm Graham Walker, coming to you from the Independent Institute here in Oakland, California. We try and bring notable experts on a variety of topics to discuss topics of the day. And we think giving you a perspective that you're not likely to hear elsewhere. And today we're going to be talking with George Gilder. Let me welcome George Gilder to Independent Conversations. Hi, George.
Great to be here.
It's a pleasure to see you again. See, I met George Gilder first. I met you first. I think it was sort of deep in the winter of maybe January of 1982 in Western New York. And you had recently published Wealth and Poverty, like the year before, I think. Wasn't Wealth and Poverty published in 1981, George?
1980.
80, okay, 1980, which was a fabulous book.
Yeah.
And I think President Reagan loved the book. If I remember hearing he read it at some point. Did you hear that story?
Yeah, I mean, he wrote me letters about it before publication. He read articles, excerpts from it. It was excerpted all over the place before it came out. And it made me President Reagan's most quoted living author.
Wow. Well, it was a fabulous book. I mean, the whole part, your creativity in seeing what others didn't see about the system of free exchange, so-called capitalism, when you analogized it to, what was the exchange thing among the Native American tribes?
Well, there's Tanamoshi, that's the Japanese one. There are a whole bunch of different ways that...
were the tribes that get together and they would simply give and share, which was fascinating. And you pointed out that there is a lot of that in what we call capitalism, which therefore doesn't pivot simply on self-interest, but rather on something at least akin to benevolence. That was really an eye-opener to me, George. Thank you.
Well, I enjoyed writing Wealth and Poverty, and I've been doing various elaborations on it ever since. I mean, my technology books really sprang from Wealth and Poverty, which focused on creativity and the image of our creator as the great force in economic growth. And since then, I've been working on the information theory of economics. Which,
I remembered the term I was trying to think of a moment ago. I think you described it as the potlatch. Wasn't it called the potlatch?
Yeah, the potlatch.
That was really amazing. And it helped me too, because I was a college student at the time, or just after being a college student. And I was having a lot of tussles with my peers and professors who all thought that socialism was just the coolest thing there ever was. And they usually portrayed capitalism in very distorted terms. And so you gave me a whole new vocabulary. I was grateful for that.
Well, thank you.
So people said you're an economist, but then sometimes you seem like you're a sociologist because you wrote Men and Marriage. And then other people say that you're a technologist and a futurist. What are you, George?
I'm a historian.
Okay.
But Wiki calls me a techno-utopian futurist. I have no idea why, but anyway, I'm willing to play the role that is imposed on me.
Well, we're glad.
I really probably believe in a hierarchical universe, and I believe it's helpful to have a philosophical perspective that unifies all these different fields,
right,
and thus allows you to transcend this fragmentation of analysis that afflicts all the universities, where everybody has his own specialization, many of them with different jargons and idioms of expression that even exacerbate the fragmentation of knowledge.
Yeah, they really do. And your work has really always been characterized by the integration rather than the fragmentation,
Yeah.
which makes sense. I think that partly is what must have driven you to be one of the co-founders of the Discovery Institute in Seattle, because they have that.
Discovery Institute.
Yeah. I mean, they seem to have quite a synthetic understanding of the sciences there. Is that right?
Yep, that's what we try to do. We try to bring the sciences together, and economics is just another part of biology, which is another part of physics, which is all subsumed in a cosmic vision that we're going to expound at our COSM conference on November 10th to 12th. Peter Thiel is going to be the keynote, and we got Kai-Fu Lee speaking on artificial intelligence, and Bob Metcalf of Metcalf's Law is going to be expounding on the continued significance for cryptocurrencies and other such paths of technological advance. We're going to have an exciting time at COSM, and I'm going to debate Newt Gingrich on China.
Oh, ho, ho.
So that's I don't think war with China it brings any benefits that I can imagine.
I agree with you on that. What could be less productive than a war with China? Good grief. So if our viewers want information about that conference, where should they go, George?
COSM.technology, just COSM.technology.
So the technology is the suffix.
Yeah, that's right. COSM, C-O-S-M, COSM.technology.
Okay, you can go there to find out about this conference that's going on. Is it next month, did you say, or November, George?
November.
In November, okay.
10th to 12th.
Great. Well, okay. So in the meanwhile, you're also releasing a brand new book. I think the publication date is officially October 15th, if I'm not mistaken, but here's the title, here's the cover of it: Gaming AI, Why AI Can't Think But Can Transform Jobs. Very nice and compelling cover. You have some good artists working with you, George.
Good. Well, thank you.
And I also noticed that if you want to go to Amazon, you can order it already. Apparently, they've got some in stock, it seems like. So we invite our friends.
It's been out for a while.
Oh, okay. So that's why they've got some in stock. So let's talk about that book. I mean, I got a copy of it, and I was utterly fascinated by the way that you take up the standard challenge and kind of turn it in a direction that people don't expect. I mean, the standard challenge. So, I mean, you mentioned early in the book that some people think that AI is going to be for sure a demotion of the human race. And I think on page 20 of the book, there's a very arresting quote caught my eye, where you quoted the late Stephen Hawking, who pronounced the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race.
No, that's what Hawking said. And Elon Musk, who's alive today, says that AI is more dangerous than nukes. And I really, and a lot of people talk about a singularity to come. And this was really predicted way back at Bletchley Park by
Alan Turing?
Alan Turing's colleague, Jack Good. And he said that once we invent artificial intelligence, that'll be the last invention we'll ever have to make, because a true artificial intelligence would be capable of creating machines, intelligent machines that could outperform the original artificial intelligence, and thus release a cascade of intelligence through the universe. And
culminating, the theory was it would culminate in this so-called singularity, which I think that's supposed to be where basically the artificial intelligence takes up where we left off and says goodbye to us, right?
Yeah, that's really what Good was predicting. And Ray Kurzweil and Werner Vinge and a lot of people have developed the idea further. Ray Kurzweil in a very sophisticated way. He's a friend of mine, lives in the Berkshires some of the time.
Oh, really?
And
I thought he was just Silicon Valley.
no, well, he's was a technology chief at Google and developed the AI that responds to your emails. You know, Gmail has responses that allow you to anticipate how you're going to respond to a particular email.
I noticed those responses have been getting more courteous and more specific. I suppose it's due to his development, huh?
That's Ray's contribution. I mean, Ray is, as a whole skein of contributions to technology over the decades. But I think all these people have forgotten the fundamental principles of the computer science that they expound.
Well, that's what's striking about this book, because you don't seem to be as much of a doomsayer as some. In fact, you seem to, if I've got this right, you seem to think that the potential of AI may be oversold, but that even in the overselling, there could be some collateral damage, and you're trying to avoid that. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the idea that somehow AI competes with human minds is a fundamental illusion.
Well, no, a lot of these technology creators, they came to their work having already absorbed the idea that the human mind is nothing more than a meat machine.
Yeah.
And so if they knew that, quote unquote, knew that to begin with, then it's not surprising that their conception of artificial intelligence could be this singularity thing that totally transcends the human mind. Because if the human mind was never anything more than meat and electrons to begin with, then you could surpass it. But I think your point about the history of technology is that the human mind demonstrates that it must be more than just meat and electrons.
Yeah, well, when I was writing about the internet, which I did from the late 80s on through its development and the launch of all the webs of sand and glass and air around the globe. I used to do connectomes.
What does that mean?
That's a way of mapping all the connections of the global internet. And the connectome for the global internet as of a couple of years ago took about 2 zettabytes to map. You know, if you map all the connections in the global internet, it was about 2 zettabytes. And recently,
can you remind me what a zettabyte is?
10 to the 21.
Okay,
21 zeros,
Thank
essentially.
you.
I mean, just a number beyond easy imagination. And recently, an MIT campaign has been trying to map all the connections in a single human brain. And this has been really difficult.
How many zettabytes does that take?
Well, that's the question. They start with a nematode worm, which is the friend of mine was on Sidney Brenner's team that first developed DNA codes, that imagined that DNA was a code and worked out what the code would be. And he's been mapping the brain of a nematode worm for some 20 years at the University of Wisconsin. And at Thanksgiving dinner last year or so, he told me that the more he studies the connectome of the nematode worm, the less he understands the nematode brain. But the folks at MIT have taken his estimates of the connections in a nematode worm and applied it to the brain of a human being, which all the synapses and dendrites and axons and neurons and connections and all kinds in the brain. And it turns out it takes a couple zettabytes to map all the connections in a human brain. So it suggests that a single human mind or brain is as densely and complexly connected as the whole global internet is. But the global internet takes gigawatts of energy to and it's so you know, a data center takes has to be next to a glacier to deal with heat problems. I mean, generally the chief and dominant technology at a data center is all the cooling systems to take away the heat that these machines emit.
I don't seem to have
a single human brain functions with 12 to 14 watts.
Yeah, and I'm just at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't seem to need any extra cooling.
Yeah. It's and so it really, I believe that technologies function to the extent that they augment and extend human capabilities rather than attempting to compete with human capabilities, let alone usurp human capabilities. I think companies in Silicon Valley that regard their business plan as obsoleting their customers and contributors are going to fail. And
if that's how they approach it, then they're going to make themselves superfluous. And in fact, they seem to anticipate that. So if you proceed in business on the assumption that your job is to make your own customers superfluous, you're going to run out of things to do if that's your business model, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just quite absurd. I don't think, I mean, I'm even contrarian enough to not believe that I think technology is continuing to advance at a tremendous pace, but I don't think it's advancing any more rapidly than it did at the time of the Industrial Revolution. And I think that Nobel laureate economist William Nordhaus did a study of the advance of lighting. You know, this is the invention, creation of light, the amount of lumens you need to light a room at night. And he shows that the advance in lighting has been 100,000 times more rapid than is measured in the economic models. Essentially, economists, while they were writing about dim satanic mills, dark satanic mills, and
William Blake,
you know, and all various images of the dismal science, and missed the incredible expansion of light from the time it was piles of fire in a cave to the millions of candles at Versailles, to whale oil, to kerosene, to finally electricity, and then light emitting diodes, whatever it was.
Beyond electricity.
But measured by the amount of time a worker had to spend to buy the light to illuminate a room, economic progress was 100,000 times more rapid than is usually estimated in that field.
So even looking,
so we were missing during the Industrial Revolution, we missed light. And I think in this in the current AI revolution, we're missing mind.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating.
And it's and measured by the number of hours it takes a worker to earn the money to purchase the goods and services that sustain his life. This is continues to be a golden age of capitalism, with technological progress as fast as ever, and with increasing equality, because poor people benefit more from the expansion of the hours of their day to do other things than rich people already just have to spend a few minutes to earn their food and clothing and whatever. And so as technology advances, it benefits the masses most. And AI is just the newest manifestation of the advances of the computer industry since the time of Turing and Good at Bletchley Park, through John von Neumann, who was probably a paramount figure and anticipated the gigahertz machines we have today. And he really was the first person to imagine Moore's law, that we could really produce thinking machines that operated at billions of cycles a second.
Let me just step back a couple steps. And something you said a minute ago really deserves some I think, extra attention. You commented a moment ago that technological and economic advance tends to have a comparatively greater impact of benefit to the worse off, because the worse off have further to go up. And so the comparative improvement in their life, it can be greater. That's intriguing. A few years ago, I was in East Africa, in Uganda, and traveling around Kampala and some of the rural areas in that part of Uganda. It was very striking to me. Of course, the standard of living, obviously much lower than the United States. And I saw many people living in huts, not having sufficient clothing, not having sufficient covering from the rain. People clearly struggling, although there was a lot of economic activity. And at the same time, every single person sitting under every insufficiently corrugated tin roof on every little shop, on every little byway or alleyway, had a cell phone. Every single person has a cell phone.
And increasingly, it's a smartphone.
Yep.
And
they use them.
That means a supercomputer. That means an underestimation of their real standard of living.
That's right.
By the same kind of factor of 100,000 that Nordhaus had identified during the Industrial Revolution with the expansion of light. It's another form of the expansion of light.
I noticed that Ugandan roads were still pretty bad and needed to be repaved. But at the same time, I also realized that everybody in Kampala can now talk to their grandma or great grandma out in the backcountry anytime they want to. Because everyone, even in the small villages, has the cell phones, and they're also using the smartphones as a medium of payment and exchange, greatly simplifying monetary transactions. It was really quite stunning, honestly. And made me proud to be a Northern Californian.
Well, you're correct to be proud, and it is really what's bizarre is the argument that you see a lot of places that the middle class is suffering. As a result of a stagnation of technology, or whatever is the claim of the moment, that inequality is vastly expanding. Once you have a few score $1,000, that takes care of all your essential needs. And you live a lot better than a king of previous centuries.
Used to do. Mm-hmm.
If you have that smartphone and access to medical care that it implies, and ultimately the access to a whole world civilization that it manifests, and so it's rich people, that all their so-called wealth is really knowledge. It's invested. It's not liquid.
Right.
If they liquidate it, ultimately it disappears. In capitalism, you only get to keep what you give away. That is because unless your wealth is invested and is working, is providing jobs and opportunities for others, it loses value and ultimately disappears. So this is really a fundamental principle of capitalism, and it's manifested today in the phenomenal creativity that you saw in Uganda. And
we have a number of people on with us, George, simultaneously, although we may also share this recording later. But one of our current participants just sent a little note in commenting that an organization or a company called Celera Technologies in San Jose is a good example of the kind of thing you're talking about. You know Celera Technologies by any chance?
How do you spell it?
Celera.
Yeah, I have heard of Celera Technology. I'm trying to, I was thinking of Cerebras, or Cerebras, or
right.
Which I think is a more formidable accomplishment. It's wafer scale integration of AI and machine learning capabilities on a single chip, not the size of your thumbnail, but of the size of a dinner plate, and trillions of transistors on a single wafer. And wow. I really, it's somehow, I can't remember what the heck Celera does. It's
something good, apparently.
He should tell you if we're going to talk about it.
Maybe we'll see if the person.
Have your guy tell us which company that is.
Okay, I'm watching the comment box. We'll see.
Okay.
But you know, one of the great arguments in the book, Gaming AI, is your point that those in the high-tech industries who are, well, obsessed maybe, or maybe captivated is a nicer word, with this idea of moving toward a singularity where the created intelligence surpasses human mind and so forth, and makes the human mind obsolete. They seem, you argue, to have forgotten the history of their own industry.
That's right.
Now, can you tell me something about that in a way that I, as a layman, can understand? How does the development of high-tech industry itself illustrate your point about the irreducible need for the creativity of the human mind? Can you tell me something about that and that industry's history?
Yep. Well, I brought up John von Neumann, who was the great figure who imagined that you could make mathematics completely self-sufficient. That was his agenda as a young man, was to render mathematics a completely self-sufficient and complete and coherent system. And he met this young student named Kurt Gödel, who I really believe was the inventor of the computer science of our day.
Yeah.
Because Kurt Gödel, in 1931, I believe, at Königsberg, introduced a paper which showed that mathematics was intrinsically and inexorably dependent on axioms or propositions that couldn't be proven within the system itself.
So therefore, it couldn't be a fully self-contained system.
It could not be a self-contained system. And John von Neumann, who was the greatest, in my judgment, the greatest mind that we've produced over the last couple centuries, von Neumann immediately concluded from this. He was the only one who really understood Gödel's paper. And he not only saw that this meant that thinking machines would always be necessarily dependent on outside programmers or oracles, as Alan Turing defined it. And when they asked Alan Turing, who was the inventor of the universal computer architecture with von Neumann that currently dominates our lives, he said, the oracle, the one thing I can tell you about the oracle is it can't be a machine.
Mm-hmm.
And so von Neumann, by the way, those are it's the von Neumann computer architecture that still runs most of our systems. But the new architecture is a massively parallel architecture that really originated with graphics processors and is currently taken over those data centers. And it was also invented by von Neumann. So
the point being,
it's called a non-von machine, but it was invented by von Neumann.
I mean,
and he understood that artificial intelligence did not compete with human minds. Mm-hmm. It was a necessary expression of the capabilities of human minds being extended into the world.
Right. It actually is an extension, not a replacement.
Yeah.
Well, what you said a moment ago really is a way of capturing it. Tell me again who it was who made the point that all this developed machine intelligence would have to have a human mind as if it were an oracle. Who said the oracle business? That was who?
That was Turing. That was Alan Turing.
That was Alan Turing. Okay.
Yeah,
yeah. So it's a very striking metaphor because it means that, to put it maybe in sort of simple but historical terms, our human minds are to machine intelligence what the Oracle of Delphi was thought to be to the men of antiquity. In other words, a form of knowledge mysteriously outside the realm of grasping. So you would go to the Oracle in Thebes, and it probably was a bunch of hooey, but nevertheless they would go there, and they thought they were receiving insight which they couldn't possibly get from inside human minds. And so the human mind in turn is to the artificial intelligence the way the Oracle of Thebes was to humans of that day. That's a fascinating metaphor.
Yeah. And all this insight ultimately is an extension of Charles Sanders Peirce's proposition that all information is triadic. It can't be binary. If it's binary, it's restricted to symbol systems.
Mm-hmm.
And
symbols, if it's triadic,
there's no necessary connection between symbols, as in mathematics, and objects, such as the objects of the world. In order to connect a symbol system to the real world, you need an intermediating mind, a conscious human brain.
It's sort of like 2 dimensions versus 3 dimensions.
That's right.
Binary versus triadic.
Exactly. And we have a flat universe society prevailing in Silicon Valley. They imagine that they're binary symbol shufflers, which can play games a lot better than us, because a game is a symbol system. So if the only
Oh,
Yes,
we'll
that
let you get
wasn't
you.
good.
You
So
gotta get your.
wave my arms.
There
Are
you go.
we okay?
Yeah, just
And a
tilt
game,
it
game,
down just a little bit.
a
So we get
game
your.
is a
Yeah, there you
game
go.
is that working?
Yep.
A
Good.
game is a symbol system,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's on the Go board, there are just those black and gray, white and gray stones, and those stones are symbols, and they don't point beyond the board. If a computer can move those stones billions of times faster than a human can, obviously they can play Go better than
Right.
a human, just as a threshing machine can oh boy.
Yeah, it can thresh the materials better than.
It was a mistake to put this Leonard Cohen
There you go. Yeah.
book in there.
You can take him out.
He's too small.
There you go.
Do you want me to put another book in
No,
there?
you're looking good. Just make sure you're in the middle of the frame if you can.
All right.
You can tilt your screen. But your point, I think, is that a man threshing, of course, is going to be superseded by a threshing machine. With a man with a single scythe, but that doesn't mean that somehow the threshing machine is more sophisticated than the man.
That's right.
Well, so you say early on in the book, and you repeat it a few different places, that you have two basic claims, that this notion of sort of supremacy of artificial intelligence, you say it's both dumb and self-defeating. So we've been dealing with the dumb part. And I find it reassuring to learn from you in your book and other sources that the human mind actually is more complex than maybe the entire world internet system. That's reassuring. I'm glad to know that maybe there's some evidence that my mind is more than just a meat machine with some electrons pulsing through it. But that's reassuring. So maybe it's dumb, but the trouble is, could this view, George, this view of artificial intelligence rising to a supremacy over everything, could it be self-defeating? I mean, I get that it's mistaken, but how could it be self-defeating? What could it undermine to think about it the way that these guys are thinking about it?
Because they try to replace their customers and their necessary complements. I mean, this computer technology that they're creating, and which is an expression of their genius and human imagination and ability to have counterfactual projection and to imagine what doesn't already exist or is not already in the program.
That's the human part, right?
Yeah, that's the human part. It's why the medical, everybody, decades ago, I was introduced to a Dr. Weed who invented a diagnostic machine using a IBM mainframe, or maybe it was a digital mini computer, I don't know. But the idea was that inevitably, inexorably, the machine learning or artificial intelligence would excel all human diagnosticians.
Uh-huh.
And that it's not, once the symbols are prepared, once you sort all the inputs for the machine and get them all categorized and tagged correctly, then an algorithm can function at billions of cycles a second and produce an answer. But much of the intelligence is that mediation between the textures of the real world and the symbols that express it within the machine. And when we now have the illusion of quantum computing. I wrote a book about quantum
computing. You did. What was the title of that book?
That was called Microcosm.
Okay.
And that I published in 1990, I think, 1989. And microcosm was called the quantum era in economics and technology. And of course, it's the quantum era. The whole semiconductor industry, which microcosm described, and its history was based on manipulating matter from the inside in accordance with quantum principles. And so all technology, all our computer technology is based on quantum physics. That quantum physics is the theory of the microcosm, the nanocosm, the picocosm, whatever. And but the problem is connecting the system to the real world. Now, what they call the quantum computer does is abandon the binary on-off switches of Boolean logic that have been the salvation of computers, and use qubits, which are more complex analog systems. And so quantum computing is really a return to analog computing.
Mm-hmm.
And analog computing was displaced by digital computing, not because analog computing wasn't faster, I mean, and more capacious and it didn't correspond more closely with the real world, but because in analog computing, making an analog model of the world takes endless detailed mapping of the real territories and textures of our actual existence onto the computer. And so analog computing, quantum computing is terrific, but it imposes the whole burden on the human minds that program it.
Mm-hmm. Now,
the problem gets moved from the symbol realm into the analog realm, where it incurs all the complexities and quantum uncertainties and Schrodinger's cats that populate the quantum world.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm just, a layman in these matters. And so I need to restate a couple things to make sure that I'm following you adequately. Also, you might want to tilt your screen down to make yourself just a little more centered in there you go. That's better. Thank you. So the human mind, again, layman's term here, the human mind can sort of set up closed systems, which can then maybe run artificially better than the human brain could run them. But what that closed system can't do is imagine and create systems that are outside of the closed system. And the human mind seems to be able to triadically transcend closed systems of meaning and introduce new angles. And that's what generates and powers creativity. And if those people in charge of these industries deprecate the role of human mind and creativity, they may end up putting their own enterprise on the road to, well, if not failure, at least less creativity. Is that right?
I think that's beautifully stated. That's and I think that that creativity always comes as a surprise to us.
Now, I hope that your colleagues in this industry over across the bay here in Silicon Valley, which is not far from where we are here at the Independent Institute on the other side of San Francisco Bay, I hope that they pay attention to you, because if not, and if you're right, it might be that they will be overtaken in creativity because they'll be deprecating the very qualities that made their own business work, which seems like it would be a terrible shame. They should pay attention to George Gilder.
Well, one thing they could they could pay attention to the history of their own industry.
There you go. Yeah.
And pay attention to the hierarchical universe. This idea that the human mind is a product of random fluctuations of molecules is delusion to begin with. And it's this belief that the human mind is a product of random evolutionary forces that really stultifies them.
Yeah, stultify. That's the word.
It makes them think that they can duplicate their minds with a machine, but the mind is almost infinitely more complex than the machines that they're building even today.
So those of us who
they don't understand it at all.
Those of us in some ways who are friends of the creative technological enterprise, we would encourage our colleagues, as it were, in creativity, not to underestimate their own minds.
That's
by
right.
buying into this really ridiculously reductive idea that the mind is nothing but a random set of physical mechanics.
Yeah. They got to move to life after Google.
So this is your immediate prior book, Life After Google, highly recommended, which is related to this new book, Gaming AI. Now, I'm going to take you somewhere unexpected here, I think, well, partly because I'm looking at some messages coming from our viewers right now. So following on what I just said about, and what you said about the stultifying effects of this belief, really, this faith that the mind is nothing other than accidental material, mechanical and physical. So this person says, the simplest of mind and the simplest of persons is still more complex than the entire world internet system. It's kind of hard to say there is no God. So that's what this person says. I think that's a good point. But I have another point that's a little different from that, which is this. Let me try this on you, George, because as I was reading your book, this thought really struck me, which is that there is always has been in the history of our civilization something of a tension, if not always opposition, between a mindset which is empirical in nature and a mindset which is spiritual and pious in nature. And so that's why people say religion and science have been in each other's way. There's something to that. But what I'm seeing right now, based upon your analysis, is that there is a new spiritual or devotional attitude about the singularity, which may itself form a new opposition between science and religion, the religion now being the religion of singularity, which is getting in the way of the actual scientific attitude of creativity. So this is a replay in a really unexpected form of an old opposition, or is it? I'm thinking it's a replay of a very old opposition, but the roles are reversed because the people who are all gaga over the power of AI to take over everything and to form a singularity, they're so committed to their faith position that they seem to close off their ability to be receptive to other data. And you're bringing other data in. You're the scientist, they're the priests.
Well, Jaron Lanier, who was one of the inventors of virtual reality, did the first virtual reality machines, has done a number of good books on this subject, Jaron Lanier. And he says, AI makes you stupid, essentially.
Yeah, that's your point. Very intriguing. Okay, here's another comment from one of our viewers who's on with us right now. This person, Jennifer, says, let's hear something about AI and its military implications. Drone technology and the ability to select targets without human interaction, for example. Do you know enough about this to comment on AI and military applications, George?
Well, I know that I think our whole military is based on computer systems. Manhattan Project was all modeled on computer systems. It's where Richard Feynman got really immersed in computation, was as part of the Manhattan Project. And 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 Feynman makes the crucial observation that when you're building technology, you better respond to reality, because a reality can't be fooled. And the reality is that these machine learning systems are completely dependent on human minds. They do not think at all. And the idea that these machines are somehow thinking as they shuffle bits and bytes is a religious belief.
Yes.
And it's a
Right.
particularly stultifying
Yeah, that was my
religion
point
in
a moment
Silicon
ago.
Valley.
Yeah, that was my point. So
Yeah.
that religious belief is actually means that there's national security danger in deploying artificial intelligence on the assumption that it can think for itself.
Yeah, that would certainly be true. I don't think they're quite doing that yet, but they are advancing drones probably too quickly. I mean, they probably are exaggerating their capabilities.
Yeah, we learned recently in Kabul that
yeah.
one of them didn't work the way that President Biden thought it was going to work, and that was pretty disturbing.
Yeah.
Here's another related question.
You can't tell a family of
right.
and a group of 7 children from a military group. Anyway.
Yeah, well, that's disturbing, and moreover, of course.
But I'm not debunking AI. I think AI is great. It's just another step in the evolution of the computer industry. It poses no threat to human beings. I mean, it's the idea that it's comparable to nukes, as Elon Musk describes it, is true only that nukes can be deployed by human minds, and AIs could be used to deploy nukes. I mean, but it's the human mind and the moral order and the civilization that keeps us alive. And if we imagine that that our whole civilization is a product of random mutations of chemistry and physics, I think that's the flat universe theory.
Very flat. You know, and I'm just
nothing but physics and chemistry, and that is stultifying and disabling, ultimately disabling philosophy.
We spoke a minute ago of the derailed, failed drone strike in Kabul that killed the family with children. And you said it wasn't able to distinguish. Okay, but you know, what's striking to me about that example is that if drones were made more sophisticated by their human creators, they might be able to make such distinctions, at least approximate them better. But the problem is, what if the creators of drone artificial intelligence themselves don't think that human beings are anything special, who don't necessarily believe that there's something special about mothers and children? What if they don't believe that, and they're the ones creating the artificial intelligence to run the drones? That scares me.
Yeah, well, that is, all our systems depend on an ultimate moral order.
Right.
And our creativity in the image of our creator. And that's the foundation of human life and progress. And it is disabled and crippled by a conception that somehow we're just machines, and our machines can adequately replace us.
The understanding that our creativity is because we bear this imago Dei of the creator God is not, as some people think, an obstacle to creativity and progress, but actually maybe the very source of scientific and creativity and progress.
I agree with that proposition.
I'm thinking of that great book by Stanley Yaki called The Savior of Science, published, I think, back in the 1960s, which made that point before all this began to happen. We got another interesting comment. We're going to stop soon here, but another interesting comment, one of our participants named Laura, who's actually a friend of mine, I think, she wrote in saying, can moral or ethical checks and balances be programmed into AI? Interesting.
Well,
comment.
it implies that the AI has consciousness, the potentiality for a conscience. What it has is a program, and you can program any set of constraints that you want in the machines that you build, and you have to do it. And I mean, so the answer is yes, but it's not as if we're programming a moral conscience. We're programming a set of constraints and parameters,
like a series of proxies, maybe, for a conscience.
Yeah, all right.
Way of putting it. Okay, well, here's one maybe question that I should pose you, and let it be maybe our last. Someone named Jacob has written in during this broadcast saying, I would like George to provide his insights into the future, what the world will look like in 10 years and 30 years. Oh, okay, George Gilder, futurist, that's for you to run with.
Well, I expect the domination of the theory of the information theory of economics, which prohibits really anticipating the future. The future is based on human creativity. And as Princeton Hirschman declared, creativity always comes as a surprise to us. And thus, no deterministic theory of economics, no deterministic theory of mind can create a new future.
Right.
And what differentiates our age from the Stone Age is not a steady refinement of stones. It's an advance of knowledge. Knowledge is wealth. Growth is learning, and it's all constrained by the passage of time, which is what remains scarce when all else grows abundant. And so the future will, unless it's going to be just more of the same, in other words, degeneration, it's got to surprise us. And I believe that in 30 years, we're going to live in a world that would be almost incomprehensible in some ways technologically from the world we live in today. I think we'll go beyond silicon. I think we'll produce our intelligent machines will depend on a new carbon age, that just as our brains consist of carbon, so will our intelligent machines of the future consist of various forms of carbon.
Okay,
they're already being introduced in the form of carbon nanotubes, graphene devices, and other new hybrid materials that can simulate intelligence better than our binary silicon machines of today. So I think we'll have a life after silicon.
I think isn't carbon more plentiful element than silicon?
No, it's less plentiful, but it's more. The three silicon is great because it's one of the three most common elements in the Earth's crust, which Gordon Moore, the Intel founder, believed was providential, that
I see.
silicon,
Interesting.
aluminum, and oxygen are the three most common substances. And
I would note that,
but there's enough carbon out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of carbon out there
in order to create carbon machines.
Right.
And I believe that the new substrates of the new intelligent machines will be carbon based.
At the end of the book, Gaming AI, George, you say these interesting words, and I think I'll stop here. You say an explosion of productivity does not mean an evaporation of work. AI will make people more productive and thus more employable. It will create new and safer and more interesting work. It will generate the capital to endow new companies and new ventures, as new technologies have done through history. What it will not do is create a mind. 3 cheers for the human mind and what it tells us about the universe. Thank you, George Gilder. So grateful for you taking the time. Thank you for writing the book, Gaming AI. Thank you for writing the earlier book, Life After Google, which I recommend. And thanks for being a friend of Independent Institute, George. We're grateful for that.
I'm on your advisory board.
Absolutely. Yeah, you've been pivotal to the development of this place and many other creative places. So again,
Discovery Institute is
there you go. We refer friends to our friends up in Seattle at the Discovery Institute. And again, thanks to George Gilder, and thanks to everybody who joined us for today's independent conversation from the Independent Institute here in Oakland, California. Have a great day, and please join us again. Thanks, George. Bye-bye.